Welcome back to Doctor Who The Cancel Chronicles, and today we will be talking about another spin-off that would have premiered in 2007, so let's get into this. After the Bernice Summerfield adventures ended, the BBC really wanted to make another spin-off to Doctor Who. They wanted a show aimed at early adolescent children that would air on CBBC. When going to the new showrunner, Russell T Davies, they wanted to make a show based around a young doctor on Gallifrey, which he was adamant against, as it would lose the mystery of the Doctor. He recommended a show based on Sarah Jane, as chronicled in the episode School Reunion. However, the BBC was against the idea, stating that they just had a spin-off with a female former companion going on adventures, so that was vetoed. They were really married to the idea of it focusing on a Time Lord, so with this, Russell T Davies suggested that it be about the Meddling Monk, with him trying to mess up history, but Lucy being in the way. They loved the idea. They approached Graham Garden and Sheridan Smith, and both agreed to take part in the show. The production was fast-tracked for a premiere in 2007. It was set to have 10 episodes of 25 minutes each. Originally, it was going to comprise of 5 stories, each being 2 parts, but it was then decided to go for a more quick-paced route and that each episode was going to be its own story. The overall vibe of the show was that Lucy was now going to keep an eye on the monk, while the monk tries to get into his normal hijinks across time, in addition to trying to get rid of Lucy in any way he can. Phil Ford was chosen as the head writer, while Russell T Davies was the showrunner. The first episode is Revenge of the Monk, written by Russell T Davies. After the monk accidentally kidnaps Lucy, he's trying so very hard to get rid of her, but cannot seem to shake her, so he ultimately tries to get his revenge. This would be the episode that would introduce the plot of the show, with Lucy trying to stop the monk's plans, and the monk trying to get rid of Lucy in any way possible. Whether it is leaving her on a deserted planet, leaving her with her family, tempting her in various ways, but Lucy always keeps coming back. She made a promise to herself that she needed to keep the monk out of trouble, so that is what she intends to do. With this, the monk goes and tries to wipe an ancestor from history so that Lucy is never born, but of course it fails, and they go off on another adventure while he grumbles to himself. The second episode is Iceberg Ahead, written by Phil Ford. April 1912, the monk wants to try and meddle as much as he can despite his current baggage. He and Lucy are on the Titanic, and he lets her have her fun while he gets to have his. The entire episode will revolve around the monk trying to actually save the Titanic, also he doesn't have to hear about that quote-unquote awful movie for so many years. While Lucy wants to save the people on board so desperately, she realizes the ramifications it could have on the timeline, so she eventually stops him before he can correct the course of the ship. They eventually leave with the monk upset. The third episode is Time of the Slitheen, written by Gareth Roberts. The monk stumbles upon one of the last of the Slitheen family, and he tries to make a deal with them, help him get rid of Lucy, and he'll give them anything they desire. But it's never that simple, is it? This would essentially be another trying to get rid of Lucy type episode with bringing back the Slitheen. It would essentially result in a comedy of errors, with the Slitheen eventually stealing some artifacts from the monk's TARDIS and leaving. The monk and Lucy eventually move on to another adventure. The fourth episode is Ghost Town, written by Rupert Light. The monk and Lucy arrive in a ghost town where there used to be a thriving economy, but is now just a decrepit town of nothing. The monk decides to fix this and make it a thriving town again, but what is his real plan? This would be the monk and Lucy finding a ghost town somewhere on the British Isles, and the monk wanting to make it thrive once again. Lucy thinks this wouldn't be too bad, so she goes back in time with him to help him, only for the history to show that they were pillaged by invaders who were destined to become more important later on in history. So Lucy has to stop him once again, and history is saved. The fifth episode is How to Succeed in Monarchy Without Really Trying, written by Phil Ford. The monk disguises himself as an advisor to King John in the 13th century. He's trying to stop him from killing his nephew Arthur and starting a war with King Philippe Auguste. He claims that it will help Britain in the long run. But is he lying? This would be another attempt at the monk trying to salvage history and make King John a better remembered ruler, as he believes he would have been better for Britain in the long run than the succeeding rulers. Of course, it is soon revealed to Lucy what his plans are, and she tries to stop him, but with no luck. Eventually, the plans just crumble by themselves, and King John becomes the horrible ruler he is destined to be, and the monk and Lucy leave soon after. The sixth episode is The Nightmare Man, written by Joseph Lidster. Lucy keeps having bad dreams. Is this the monk's doing or something else entirely? This would be a bit more of a filler episode that would take notes from the actual episode of the same name. The Nightmare Man tries to infiltrate the TARDIS through Lucy's dreams. The monk also has these dreams, and he and Lucy are forced to work together properly to help put a stop to him. They do, and both wake up. The seventh episode is Alliance of the Angels, written by Gareth Roberts. The monk discovers weeping angels in an old abandoned catacomb. He makes a deal with them to have them take Lucy, but of course things don't go according to plan. Another episode that would be very similar to the Slitheen episode. The Angels don't exactly negotiate and honestly don't really care. So the Angels end up transporting the Monk back in time, and the Monk is meant to relay to Lucy how to fly his TARDIS to come get him. And initially she's apprehensive and wants to go back to the Doctor, but realizes that no one would be able to stop the Monk's plan, so she goes back and picks him up. He is begrudgingly grateful. The 8th episode is War vs. Time, written by Phil Ford. The dreaded war chief returns trying to meddle with history once again. This time the Monk gets jealous. He wants to prove he's the better meddler, no matter the cost. While getting caught in a war in history, the Monk and Lucy stumble upon the war chief, who managed to escape the events of Exodus. Now he's trying to resume his plans for invading Earth with brainwashed soldiers. Lucy thinks the Monk will stop him, but the Monk just wants to prove he's the better meddler. So he also starts meddling in history to see who really succeeds. But due to the Monk's actions, his plans and the War Chief's plans crumble, and the War Chief gets away while the Monk and Lucy go back to his TARDIS. The 9th episode is Lost in Time, written by Joseph Lidster. After a failed plan to get rid of Lucy, now the Monk and Lucy are without a TARDIS and need to figure out how to get back to it before something really bad happens. The Monk and Lucy are separated from the TARDIS, and the entire episode would be them trying to locate it and get it back. They end up hitching a ride across the universe and eventually find it and leave for another adventure. The 10th episode is Mission Accomplished, written by Phil Ford. The Monk realizes the plan was simple: abduct Lucy as a baby so she would never be able to grow up. And here's the thing, can the Monk accomplish this, or will it deteriorate like his plans always do? The entire episode would be the Monk infiltrating a hospital, and things are actually starting to go right. Lucy is locked away in the TARDIS, and the Monk manages to abduct baby Lucy and brings her to his TARDIS. He sees that Lucy, grown-up Lucy, has now disappeared from his TARDIS, with him screaming to the heavens that he finally won. He is about to set off for another adventure when he notices things start to unravel timeline-wise. He looks at baby Lucy, and it cuts to black. The Meddling Monk had a very mixed to negative first series. Many found the humor to not be very funny, the plots seemed to be rather uninteresting and repetitive, and overall a very bland show. However, the few things that were praised were Graham Garden and Sheridan Smith, who were trying despite the subpar material, as well as having good chemistry with one another. The ratings were also lower than what was projected, but despite this, CBBC renewed it for another series with some changes in the hopes to gain some ratings back. With this, Russell T Davies wanted to focus mainly on Doctor Who, so he left the series as showrunner, picking Ford as his replacement in the hopes he could make the show better and make it work, as well as making the episodes now 2-episode serials so that there would be a focus on quality instead of quantity, which Ford always wanted to do anyway. So there would be 5 stories this season, with each story being 2 parts, as well as the CBBC wanting to limit the humor due to that being the biggest negative from the last series. With this, nothing else changes. The first story is Who is Lucy Miller, written by Phil Ford. The Monk was successful in removing Lucy Miller from the timeline, but now the universe is in chaos because she wasn't there to help the Doctor on his various adventures. So now the Monk must return baby Lucy to her proper place and time, or history is stuck like this. But it's never that easy for the Monk, right? This would be a big epic 2-parter to open the series, with the Monk trying to return baby Lucy to her proper place and time before the timeline is permanent. Unfortunately, he has to navigate a Cybermen threat, a broken TARDIS, tons of cameos from other characters and races that the Doctor did not stop without Lucy's help, and overall a very insane story. He eventually does return Lucy to her proper place and time, her present self is back in the Monk's TARDIS, and they go off once more. The second story is Seeing the Light, written by Rupert Late. After what happened in the last story, the Monk realizes not to mess with history anymore, much to Lucy's happiness. But the Monk finds himself in a war that can be easily fixed. Can the Monk keep his meddling to himself? After the events of the last story, the Monk saw the proper ramifications of what could happen with his meddling, and he said it was too much, he didn't like it at all, so he's just gonna have fun, he's not gonna meddle anymore. But he's not a do-gooder like that doctor fellow, he's just having fun. So they decide to head off to a destination until the TARDIS starts breaking down, and they find themselves in the middle of an alien war. The first episode would end with the Monk finding out that playing both sides, he can end this war in either side's favor, but he promised not to meddle. The second episode would then involve the Monk pretty much reverting back to his meddling self and playing both sides until a side comes out on top, a more totalitarian race that wants to defeat every species in their galaxy, and the war was essentially putting that off further until both sides were vanquished. Eventually the Monk tries to leave, but of course Lucy forces him to fix it. He does so, and starting now he decides not to meddle, only to realize that the Jadoon is hot on their tail. The third story is The Pursuit of the Jadoon, written by Russell T Davies. The Monk has finally caught the eye of the police force, the Jadoon, after the events of the last story, but he eventually finds himself stuck with Lucy in a prison. He must get out before the Jadoon finds them and get rid of them for good. This would be a bit of a bottle episode similar to what Smith and Jones was, taking place in one location for the majority of the running time, but this time it is a prison rather than a hospital. They have to navigate the guards and inmates with the Jadoon coming after them. Eventually, Lucy talks her way out of trouble with the Jadoon and pretty much tricking them to go after someone else. Eventually, Lucy and the monk leave his TARDIS. The fourth story is The Waters of Mars, written by Phil Ford. Mars, 2059, Bowie Base 1, last recorded message: don't drink the water, don't even touch it, not one drop. This would be an adaptation of The Waters of Mars, but with many changes to make it more kid-friendly. The darker moments would be done away with, Gadget would be a bit more center stage as a cute robot, and then the ending with Adelaide would not be shown at all as a suicide because you wouldn't be able to show that on a children's show. The story would end with the monk and Lucy going back into the TARDIS and finding out that Adelaide died mysteriously shortly after, but it's never explained by what. But most of the episode would be for the most part the same, although have to be adjusted to fit a companion into the mix. Lucy would actually be the one who would let this happen because she's sick of sitting idly by while people who don't deserve to die do so, and the monk, despite being on a good streak, would eventually cave in and change history. The fifth story is The Vacation of the Daleks, written by Joseph Lidster. In between invading different places, the Daleks are taking a rest. The monk, still high from his last adventure, decides that he's going to kill the Daleks for good. But can he actually and truly and finally use his meddling forces for kind of good? This would be the big epic season finale with the monk versus the Daleks with Lucy in tow. They plan to kill the Daleks over the course of the first episode, and the second episode would be them enacting their plan. They go through most of the motions until things start to go wrong, like they always do, and the plan doesn't work due to some interference from some human activists who don't want people committing genocide, even if it is for the Daleks. Lucy and the monk eventually leave before the Daleks can kill them, and the monk starts concocting a plan to deal with humanity once and for all. The Meddling Monk Series 2 was a bit better received than the previous series, but not by much. The ratings sank even lower, and because of this, the show was ultimately canceled after just 2 series. It was because of this that it was decided that there would be an episode in the final season of Eleven's run to give the show a somewhat proper ending to the cliffhanger of the series. But that is it for the 4th spin-off of Doctor Who, which unfortunately never went anywhere despite its good idea. Tune back in 2 months to see how 11's era ends and 12's era begins.